Thank you very much for still being there with us on Kakaki, the African Voice. Time now to bring in our guests to the issue, the conversation on the Nigerian economy and Nigeria's debt profile. Over 23.5 trillion naira debt is what Nigeria is sunk into at the moment. The Nigerian government has consistently maintained the position it is sensible borrowing. But how sensible is it? Well, we have economists joining us, two of them. Paul Alage, forgive me, I forgot your name earlier. How can I forget my friend's name? Good morning, and thank you for joining us, Paul.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you so very much for having me.
Great. Ishaya, Bajami, it's been a while. We had you on this program. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Paul, let me start with you. I mean, we've talked about our debt profile and all of that, but the concern for many people has been that when you look at what Nigeria's revenue is and what Nigeria is spending in terms of debt, putting it in perspective actually, from 2016 to 2021, Nigeria spent 13.465 trillion naira on debt servicing. And when you look at it futuristically, the MTEF 2022 to 2023 is making a projection that the federal government will spend 14.6 trillion naira in the 3 years from 2022 to 2024 on debt servicing alone. Compare that to the revenue which the government has been able to achieve, which has fallen 50% short of what the budget is. Are we facing a crisis, or are we already in a crisis? Paul, let me start with you.
Well, when it comes to the issue of debt, I think quite a number of us have spoken, and we have also used what we know professionally to advise government. The truth is that traditional economists have agreed that two important things must be considered when it comes to borrowing, whether a country should continue borrowing or if the borrowing makes sense. The third one is what applied economists have added. And if I can quickly mention, because of time, first of all, the first thing to be considered is what is happening to debt to GDP. Debt to GDP for Nigeria is less than 40%, which means Nigeria could as well continue when you compare us with countries such as South Africa or United States, depending on the country you are looking at. But the load of debt, the weight of debt is not measured by non-functional instruments called GDP. It is rather measured by the debt service to revenue, which you rightly mentioned. For Nigeria, over 90% debt service to revenue. It's worrisome, and the true cost of debt service is not the amount. It's actually what government would have been able to do, which includes road construction, which include infrastructure, power supply, etc., which government is unable to do. So when it comes to debt service to revenue, we have already passed the threshold of 30 to 33%, 1/3 of our revenue. So it no longer makes economic sense for us to continue borrowing. The third one, and the most important one, is the impact of debt. As we speak, our debt has increased by the average of by over 20% on average in the last 5 years. But when you look at economic growth using GDP as a measure, we have done less than 2.2% on the average. What that means, therefore, is that it no longer makes economic sense for us to continue to borrow. So when you look at the numbers, ordinarily the numbers will not add up. And I hope the authority and those in government today will find alternative more friendly. They will find alternative more viable to borrowing, so that not just the future generation, but the current generation may have to pay. And paying is another conversation entirely. On February 27, 28, it was reported that Nigeria added 1 trillion naira to our debt profile for borrowing no money. And you ask me why? Because exchange rate was devalued. The sum total of the increase in the valuation, which are evident in what we are borrowing, not the entire loan, but the foreign loan component, gave us 1 trillion naira. If you look at all our debt profile, quite a number of amount of money what has even been added. And when it came to servicing, where are we going to get money to service our loan? Is it going to come from naira, not the dollar? So these are big issues, and I hope the authority will do the needful in no time.
Well, we'll talk about those, further interrogate those big issues, Paul. But let me bring in Bajami into the conversation now. The Minister of Finance reacting to, repeated calls by many people to put a halt, a break on this borrowing, said, well, we're borrowing sensibly. I'm quoting her directly. We're borrowing sensibly and we are investing in rail and other infrastructure. If we do not do these investments, we will regret. These investments will return revenue in the future. How realistic is this, Bajama?
What is happening with the borrowing is not disconnected with the governance attitude. In this country, governance is about the citizens being accountable to those in power. That is why the voices of the people don't matter. And if they want to have a cover, they resort to instruments like the World Bank instruments, like all these things as my colleague has just mentioned. The reality, if you say we are growing, we are not feeling it. If you say infrastructure, I'm from Bauchi, it's on record that Bauchi-Gombe Road is finished. But we that are on the road, we know there is nothing there. It has even damaged the road better. And this is the experience. We spend on security. We are not secure. We spend on agriculture. We know what we are feeling in the field. And you see, when you find a government that is always dependent by the actors in governance, rather than listening to people, listening to experts, and the opinion of people is expressed by their relationship with the government of the day, this is quite discouraging. And that's what we see in the nation, which is the sensibility for you to borrow money to buy me a car, but I cannot have the meal to eat to enter that car. For you to borrow money to do all these things. What is the relationship between the borrowing? All the executions, they sing beautiful songs about what the government is doing, but the people on the street, everywhere, people in business are crying, people on the farm are crying, social system is crashing. Can we sit down once and relate governance to reality on ground, not statistics that are based on some system? What is our reality? Just because, the kind of response the minister is giving is not considering the plight of the people. It's not considering the day-to-day situation of the people on ground. So, and look at our governance structure. If we were represented very well in our legislature, they are our effective representation to put a brake on the executive. But we have a legislature today that is accountable to the executive rather than accountable to the people. They represent the executive rather than representing the people. It's far beyond issue of debt. It's about the governance system and how we are operating it. And that is why they have the chance of doing whatever without caring to respond. Now, if they take anything to the legislature in the morning, before afternoon is returned to them, they can go ahead with whatever they like to do. So it's not that any economy in the world and any economy everywhere, it has to do with confidence. What step are we taking to earn the citizens in what is happening? What steps are we taking to earn the confidence of the international community on our economy? Everybody knows around the world that we are resourced. But how are we managing our resource base to build up rather than borrowing, we cannot face our reality to manage what we have for the good of our people. Any problem we go out to borrow rather than facing our problem, having a strategy, long-term strategy, and this kind of reactive processes and governance weaknesses especially interconnectivity between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, including the role of the media. How do they see the media? And whenever you differ with the opinion of the government of the day, irrespective of the party, is a crime. They want all of us to sing a song that everything is well while we are feeling it is different. So for me, it's a matter of how responsive the government should be, how realistic. Can we look inward for once and develop systems and processes that will help us in the next few years to be able to do something strategic and shift level, rather than just all these palliatives that don't reach everybody, and we are piling debt for everybody. If you say projects, where are the projects going? And all of us, the children, including the children unborn, are bearing this burden. Can government help us reflect this? And how do we carry the burden that we have not had the benefit? That's the perspective I see.
Crucial questions, Ishaya, because if borrowings are put into infrastructure, your question is where really are the infrastructure? Paul, let me return to you. Nigeria's revenue, I do not know. Do you think that the country can do much better than it did in 2020? And
hello,
can you hear me, Paul?
I'm here. I'm with you.
Great.
I'm here.
Let's look at what Nigeria's revenue was in 2020, just the preceding year, and what the budget was. The budget was 10.27 trillion.
I can hear you.
I can hear you too. The budget for 2020 was 10.27 trillion naira, and the total revenue the country was able to get for that year was 5.37 trillion naira. That's just about half of what the budget was. That means a deficit of roughly 50%. Talk to us about revenue. How possible, or is it even possible, that Nigeria can raise revenue that matches its budget each year? Is it possible, so that it can serve as an alternative to the need to look for loans to borrow?
Thank you so very much. From our estimates in our organization, federal government should be doing nothing less than 20 trillion naira in revenue. And the state government, 36 state and FCT, approximately should do between 40 to 45 trillion naira in revenue. And these are trillion naira. I mean trillion naira, not billion. So 20 trillion minimum and about 45 trillion. So the question many people have asked, which we have explained in our conferences, meetings, and also in our presentation, has been, how can we make this in revenue? So I'm going to make this a bit solution oriented, and what I think government can do. Now, well, when you look at sectors that have been reported by the National Bureau of Statistics, by the way, National Bureau of Statistics is an agency of government, and they continue to report sectors that are doing really well, even as COVID continues to fight economics of the world. But we have seen sectors that are growing even in leaps and bounds. They are growing in double digits. One of these sectors, and there are quite a number of them, one of these sectors in Nigeria is telecom sector. We've seen organizations even declare billions and trillions of naira in terms of revenue and profit. Unfortunately, what goes to federal government in terms of company income tax and what they pay in terms of taxes and rent and charges to state government has refused to remain the same. So for us, we sincerely think that government need to follow the money, not just organization to follow the money for government. Government, we need to follow the money and see why these sectors are growing, and what you come to them, they've not been growing at all. That's one. Two, there are also other initiatives. For instance, when you look at the Papa Osho, the expressway, it's being constructed by a sector-driven person, African richest man. What is wrong in repeating the same if government can use public-private partnership? Because the truth is that government over the years have tried to manage federal roads or say state roads that it belongs to them, they will do it. Yes, we see contracts going out, but we are not seeing road being constructed. At least some of them have not been constructed, even though some of them have been awarded and approved and disbursement have been made. So for us, we sincerely believe that government will need to partner with private sector in terms of this project for them to have public-private partnership and use tax credits, which is being done in some environments, to finance some of these projects rather than government saying it wants to carry on this load directly. This will help government save not less than 7 trillion naira, within 1 to 3 years, rather than what we are practicing right now. Then revenue will come. And when I say revenue will come, I don't mean revenue will come from taxing Okada rider or taxing people that are already poor. No. But when you look at the wealth of Nigeria, in whose hand are this wealth concentrated? Those are the people that have the money. And the method of also revenue collection in Nigeria, particularly from fiscal authority, may need to be adjusted a bit so that we can make provision for more and more revenue for Nigeria. That said, now there is not so much federal government can do without the support of state government and alignment within state and the federal government. And I strongly believe if the needful is done, we can surely grow what we generate in terms of revenue.
Paul, I found what you said quite interesting, that Nigeria can potentially raise 20 trillion naira revenue annually. Please, from your analysis and your studies, how is that possible?
Okay, so we consider a number of sectors that government is not generating revenue enough for, which includes agriculture, agro-processing. We also look at the maritime sector that government should be doing not less than 4 to 5 trillion naira on. We also believe government can do more in terms of customs, but there are quite a lot of leakages in custom. That is why we are not doing that much. We also believe what government is spending on legislature is quite high, and not just on legislature, even executive, from federal and state level. Government can also conserve some of the monies being spent in that regard. When we put all of this together, we have a bit over 20 trillion naira for federal government alone. And we sincerely believe that we can optimize this spending from maritime particularly to customs and of course to what FRS is doing, we can do well over 20 trillion naira. But of course, to put process in place is one, to put system and structure in place is another. But more importantly, who is going to drive the system? When the culture of a people becomes endemic in corruption, I'm telling you, no matter how much you do, we have to manage both culture and system simultaneously. If you don't do that, the culture of a people will ruin good system that has been built. And when you have people with good culture but very bad system or very bad structure, it's also going to ruin the other. So we need to work the two. We need to marry the two together, which I think becomes the major challenge we are facing as a country.
Thanks, Paul. Ishaya, let me come to you because this issue of borrowing for many people is an easy way for the government. The difficult way is ensuring that, like Paul said, the necessary revenue generating potentials in the economy are properly harnessed. I take you to the report by Dr. Doyin Salami, head of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council of this current government. And he also made reference to what Paul has said. He said, to improve revenue, we must block leakages and unlock opportunities. So even the government's advisory council admits that there are still huge leakages in the system. Ishaya, what's so difficult about blocking these leakages? Is it that the government does not want to do it, or it just doesn't have the capacity to do it? Ishaya, are you with us? Can you hear me? All right, Paul, maybe you take that question because we seem to have momentarily lost Ishaya.
Yes. Do you want to repeat the question?
Yes, I'm talking about leakages, the existing leakages in the system, which the Presidential Economic Advisory Council even admitted exist, which is a huge drain on Nigeria's economy. I'm wondering, what's difficult about sorting out this problem? Is it the lack of political will or just the lack of capacity to do it?
Okay, so beyond the will, I think the president is in the best position to block will, because in 2015, while quite a number of us respected his posture, even though we have read quite a number of things about, and positive things for that matter, about Mr. President, we strongly believe that somebody with this kind of pedigree, based on the information made available to quite a number of us, that he was going to do well, but blocking leakages, and we still have quite a number of them around, still becomes really worrisome even till now. But you see, when you look at our structure, we have average of about 70% of all our budget voted for recurrent expenditure. And when you want to steal, it is easier with recurrent expenditure when you compare with capital expenditure. So the pattern of our budgeting itself is wrong. We cannot continue to vote more for recurrent expenditure and expect miracles to happen. It simply means that our consumption is 70 and our investment on the economy is less than 30%. Even that investment, if there are still administrative investments, motor vehicles and so on and so forth, that will not directly impact on the majority of the people. So we cannot continue to have this kind of budget and this kind of pattern and expect something to change. We strongly believe that there should be a peg, and this will come from Revenue Mobilization Commission. There should be a peg to what some office holders are earning today. It is not realistic, and this is what makes politics to be very lucrative for quite a number of persons. They believe that rather than being a lecturer in the university who will go on strike, I've not seen politicians go on strike. I've seen medical doctors, some of them are on strike now. I've seen courts, lawyers and courts went on strike. I've never heard that before in my entire life. That judiciary will go on strike. I've also seen teachers, they've gone on strike. But where is the juicy part? When we say Nigeria flow with milk and honey, the question is, who is drinking the milk and who is drinking the honey? I just say that this is going directly to the mouth of politicians. We have seen policemen, those that should be protecting us, they left service and they are protesting. I was saddened, from my heart. I was saddened that we have police officers that are retired that are saying that their pension has not been paid for some time. Even those that are serving today, we can abuse police, we can say all manner of things to police. But when we don't take care of them when they're in service, what more do we expect? We come out of the institution, of police and the force generally. So I strongly believe that by the time we are ready to control our appetite, and when I say our appetite for things that will not impact development in our economy, then we can say that we are ready for development.
Let's also look at other options to these loans, Paul. One of the recommendations in the past, the government has talked about it in the past, haven't really implemented it, has been selling off of certain national assets that have become more or less liability to the government. A case in point is Nigeria's refineries. A recent report by the NNPC indicates that the Kaduna refinery, the Port Harcourt refinery, the two refineries there, and that in Delta State, have in the past 1 year or past few years produced zero revenue, zero profit. For 2020, the combined loss from all those refineries was 108.29 billion naira. In 2019, it was 162.22 billion naira. Yet, if you want to calculate based on these indices, what has been the loss in the past 10 years, you'll shudder. Well, we might be hitting figures of 1 trillion naira, 2 trillion naira or more. It falls into the category of those liabilities that the government seal has in place, funds it every year, pays so much money, yet it's not making any profit. Dr. Doyin Salami recommended some of these things. It's estimated that these debt assets could fetch the country about $900 billion or so. Do you think that the government should seriously walk the talk now and actually sell off these refineries or some of these debt assets?
Well, the irony of it is that according to NNPC declared profit for the first time in a long time. But when you look at the numbers you mentioned, which of course, many of which are in public domain, I wonder where the profits came from. But that said, for me, we have continued to turn around the 4 refineries, but they refuse to roll like Baba's chair. You know, they've remained static, and I've not seen a major progress. I was speaking with some persons who are lawmakers, and they asked questions regarding what should they be doing with the refineries. And I asked them question, what is government business doing business? The role of government is to regulate private sector, not to become one of the major player, a major player. And if the government have interest, which nothing is wrong with, they could give these refineries to private sector, and government will not sell 100%. The same thing we have done to distribution companies, you know. So if you want to, for instance, government is considering removing subsidy, which is fine, but if you don't do it rightly, it will come back to hurt us as an economy. So private sector is there to help improve output, and in the process they want to make profit. So for government to checkmate that profit is not what they have turned the refineries to, and I want to sell some of the shares for private sector so that we can have output, and the money, the returns, the gains, like we have seen with the NLNG, we can have part of the returns go to federal government, and that will be meaningful and significant enough for us to say we are starting something. But unfortunately, that has not happened with the refineries, you know, partially because legislatures have said, oh, let's continue to turn it around every 2 years, and in 4 or 5 years, money you have spent to turn around is enough to start even to build half or not 100% of those refineries. Why? Because some persons are benefiting directly from this. And I want Mr. President to bring that vigo, what we know him to do, you know, to call private sector, you know, private sector persons, so that Nigeria will even be perceived as a country with consistent policy, not what we have today. Then we can say that as an economy, we are serious and we have direction as to where we want to go. We cannot keep 4 refineries and they become wasting assets. In a way, we continue to spend money on salaries, maintenance, etc., without having a meaningful or significant direction. So I don't think this is the way to go. And I think government has some assets, some of which can be sold. When you say selling assets, I don't mean to sell the asset and you have nothing away from it. I know quite on more persons, they have some emotional attachment and all of those. Those are fine. Nothing is wrong with that. But for me, asset that you know can give you potential revenue. And as a government, we do not have the capacity to run. Why not partner with private sector so that such revenue, the driving force for refineries, for instance, will come with private sector, and government will, of course, have its own share, while we don't sacrifice the output so that they can perform the real reason why those refineries were there in the first instance.
And quite worrisome too when you just remember that just a few months ago in April 2021, $1.5 billion was approved for another turnaround maintenance of the Port Harcourt refinery,
which may not turn anyway.
All right, let me have Ishaya's comments as we sign off. How can Nigeria look inwards to address its current economic challenges without necessarily thinking that going outside to source for loans is a way to go? Ishaya.
The whole issue about governance, as I started saying, is that today governance in Nigeria is about getting access to resources by the executive, the legislature, the civil service. It's not about Nigerians. That is why when you talk about government not making it, the people holding government structure are making it. And they are the very ones that we are working with them, because there is no accountability system in place to hold the civil service accountable, the public service accountable, and those doing business accountable to the generality of Nigerians. And because Nigerians have lost that handle, that is why we are where we are today. The government is too large for Nigerians. You cannot have a car or a lorry carrying a load of 5,000 at the expense of 100,000, and you think you are making it. That's the kind of government we have. It's too loaded, and nobody has the courage to really change the system. What is being spent on legislature, executive, and the civil service generally if you think they are there to serve the Nigerian community, then something is wrong. You cannot spend more money on the cooks and the cookeries and while people are starving. Why? I mean, we need to have a system that works for us. All this dancing around refinery, customs, if you see how people try to work in these places because of what they get, can we sanitize the system in such a way that the system should be working for the people, not the people being an attachment to this governance system? All these things that we are talking about, including sometimes, what do you call it, the civil society. The civil society also have some attachment. People just get what they want out of the system. Even we that talk, you see, I've gone silent for some time because the issue is we talk the talk. But when people have access, the same people we criticize government of the past, when they get into the system, you wonder whether they are still the ones, whether they have been changed completely. So the whole issue is, are we serious about this nation? Have we resolved as Nigerians to make Nigeria our pride? Or are we there defending ourselves, defending our tribes, defending our religion, defending the regions we come from? Can we have at once, can we resolve to have a nation and work as a nation and work towards the good of everybody? All these technicalities are technical things that can work when we have an organized system we believe in that is accountable to us. For me, the whole thing is that we've refused to face the reality we are in. Whenever anything triggers us to discuss in that direction, it's seen as opposition, it's seen as anti-government. We really need to do something about it. All the technicalities, I agree with my colleague on this discussion, and I like all the things that are coming out. But the whole system is shaky. It's not based on something that you spend on the military, no result. You spend on refinery, no result. You spend on custom, no result.
Ishaya, we may have to go. We may have to go now.
Custom is giving us this amount, and you say we are recovering debt. Where are they?
Absolutely.
And you tell us
key questions.
At least
key questions. But we want to say thank you so much. We have to go now. That's much. That's a much we can take on this. I want to say thank you so much to you, to Paul Alage, who's an economist, and Ishaya Bajami, who joined us from Bauchi, for your solutions-driven analysis on this conversation. Thank you so much, gentlemen.